What is Operation Sandman, and is it a coordinated effort between hundreds of countries to collapse the dollar at the same time? Let's break down this theory, what I have found, and what we should all do about it. Hey, welcome to the show. Molly here. Today we're going to talk about Operation Sandman, also referred to in some circles as Project Sandman, but same idea. This is a theory, because it's a little difficult to prove, that hundreds of nations have a coordinated plan to basically pull out of the US dollar system at the same time, causing some fairly significant consequences, which we'll talk about today. I actually heard about this, or heard this label months ago, last year when I was doing videos on Project Ion and Project Guardian. I kind of had a whole list of all the projects, whatever, and was planning to do videos on all of them. And Project Sandman sounded like a neat one, or at least interesting, not neat in a constructive way, but like fascinating one. However, I had a really hard time finding anything beyond like a couple of tweets. Like there wasn't really any sauce that I felt like confident enough to like do a whole thread on in a video. So fast forward to March 26th, and the president of Kenya showed us this video, or released this video for all of us.
For the people who work numbers, I am giving you free advice that those of you who are holding dollars, you surely might go into losses. You better do what you must do, because this market is going to be different in a couple of weeks.
All right, fast forward a few days, and we started to see some other data points indicating this sort of coordinated effort. For example, China and France have now completed their first yuan settled natural gas trade, which is a big deal. I mean, it's one thing for kind of Asian countries and African countries to trade with each other, but when you bring in a European country that is very, very entrenched in the dollar system, that is significant. And not only does it indicate the end of the petrodollar agreement, but it could be the end of like the dollar as global reserve currency and even as a payment currency globally. All right, next we're going to talk about an article that I've seen actually printed in a couple places, so I'm not really sure who the original author is. And I don't agree with everything in here. So let's just talk about a few things that we are seeing in some of the press coverage, which I think is creating a fair amount of fear, which is often the case with some of these sort of like New World Order, like the dystopian future, oh my God, the sky is falling type of coverage. And I'm just going to break down a couple of things in here that I don't necessarily agree with. So the idea here is that 100 plus nations have a global agreement now being referred to as Project Sandman. I have seen it referred to as Operation Sandman elsewhere. The intent is to drop the dollar dominance and the petrodollar agreement. It's this article, like, it's a bit dramatic. This is one of my propaganda indicators, is that if media coverage has a lot of inflammatory and emotional language in it, that's generally not how actual journalists write. That is more of a propaganda type thing. So that's why we're kind of looking at this together. When this decision is triggered, the dollar and all dollar denominated assets will plunge to near zero literally overnight. It's a very dramatic statement, which I don't think an actual journalist would write. But let's just go through this regardless. This means all dollar denominated bank accounts, bonds, pension funds, treasuries, and other investment vehicles could or will essentially be worth zero, for the simple reason that all banks and markets will freeze operations. They refer to this as Jim Rickards' ICE 9 scenario, which kind of is like that. He did say it would stop all trading. Any funds you have in the stock market will be stuck in those markets. The entire infrastructure will suffer a catastrophic liquidity crisis that will freeze nearly all transactions. Credit cards will stop functioning. Food stamp systems will go down. Basically, just seems like a Walking Dead scenario. And they are also referring to some serious hyperinflation happening. So I would like to break down, like, let's just say hypothetically that this happens and a whole bunch of countries decide on the same day that they are no longer going to participate in global trade in dollars. Okay, so you have a bunch of countries, they normally pay for stuff in dollars and they hold their value, their money, they hold it in US treasuries. It's kind of the way a lot of these things are held. US treasuries are a loan issued by the US government in exchange for interest. And you can't really cash out of a treasury, but you could sell it to somebody else because if it were to be worth less, you might want to just get whatever you could get. And where it gets kind of tricky is trying to break down this idea that trillions of dollars would come flooding home, leading to this hyperinflation situation, which I think could happen, but it's not really clear exactly how that would happen. So if I'm a country and let's say I own $1 billion worth of US treasuries and I decide I don't want them anymore, in theory, I would sell them to someone, right? And the US government slash central bank wouldn't want the value of all of those to go to zero. So they would have to probably step in and become the buyer if nobody else wanted these treasuries. Because there was this, first of all, there was a coordinated effort that nobody's buying, we're only selling. Let's tank the price. Somebody's got to buy. And if the Fed slash US Treasury comes in to be the buyer of last resort, they would probably have to print new dollars to do that, right? And then they would own these treasuries. The other nations would have to get something for what they're selling. And it's not clear like what currency. So how this would play out, I think, is a bit dramatic in some of these articles, but when you kind of break it down, it's not really clear how all these dollars would come home. Now, what would be clear is that right now there's a lot of dollars circulating in the global economy. And if a group of countries decided we're not going to participate in this market anymore, you would have a ton of dollars and not a lot of market participants. So you'd have an oversupply of dollars around. And that is possibly what they mean about this, glut or extra dollars. But how this makes it exactly to your local grocery store where there's just a flood of dollars, I'm not entirely clear. But this has happened in Weimar, Germany, and it's happened in Argentina or Venezuela. Like we've seen these types of scenarios play out, and they're very scary. I think for citizens when they go through them. What's interesting here is that we've kind of been discussing this type of thing for a long time, so I'm not terribly shocked by any of this. I also think it's very likely and plausible there is a coordinated effort among the part of nations to participate in a de-dollarization process together. The big question, though, for most of us is all right, so let's say this is really happening and there is a coordinated effort to pull out of the dollar system at the same time with the intent of crashing the dollar system. Well, what do you do about it? One, and I've talked about this in some other videos, is I would not let yourself get emotionally attached into this thing. Now, I spent a couple days this week watching a very extensive set of videos about the history of the money system. And it's a topic I'm fascinated with. I've spent a lot of time over the last couple of years digging into this. And the more you sort of learn about it, the more you come to this realization that the whole money system is fake. Like it's made up. I realize we all use money to buy food and to pay for your rent and to buy gas. Like we need our world like relies on money, but it is a fake construct. The money is ultimately determined by humans. Like there is no intrinsic value in money. There's no intrinsic value in gold. There's no intrinsic value in any of this monetary system, but we are entrenched in it. And it's very likely that, you build a house of cards and as well as it might function for some people for a period of 100 years, there is always going to be a point where this house of cards collapses. It's going to likely feel very dramatic and big because we've never gone through anything like this in our lifetime. But my kind of advice to myself, and for those of you that would like some guidance on it, is resist getting emotionally involved and try to take on the role of observer. Like be watching this almost like we're watching a movie or you're watching a TV show, and you can feel what's going on, but you're not, you're not a participant, like you are the observer. That can help with perspective, because there's some predictions that there could be a couple of dark days before we transition to the new money system, and the feeling like your life savings is gone, or your house is worth nothing, or your bank account has nothing in it, and this kind of temporary panic. I'm going to just simply make the decision through each step of this that I'm going to be fine. Um, that all this sort of stuff around money, it's made up anyway. So as we transition to a new thing, which will also probably be made up, I'm just kind of going to go along for the ride. Now, I'm not trying to minimize anyone's legitimate, worry and fear and panic, but just know that you have control over your emotions, even in situations where it might feel like you do not. And as we kind of go through this shift and it looks like things are really bad, I would just remind yourself that this money thing is not real. Even though it can buy real things like food and whatever, we have been programmed since we were tiny, tiny people to believe this money thing is a different thing than it actually is. And it's been incredibly clever and effective. I totally bought it all, hook, line, and sinker. We've all been led to believe our whole lives, like, work hard, make this money, accumulate as much of this money as possible, build this stash of money. It's all about the money. And you'll be really important and significant if you have lots of this money. And as we transition to a new system, it might feel like all that stuff you worked for is gone or leaving or whatever. Just know that I'm pretty confident that the new system, which will probably include asset-backed currencies, which I've talked about here before, it's going to be great. There's going to be some amazing things ahead. Major change also brings sometimes discomfort, and winners and losers in some ways. So just decide in advance, what, I'm going to end up on the right side of this, and I'm going to be a winner in this, and I'm going to make it fun and look for opportunities. It's without hesitation, I really believe that if there are opportunities for you ahead, which I think there are, you're going to see them if you are looking for them and you're optimistic. If you are in a place of worry and despair, the dollar's falling, oh my God, this is going to be terrible, then you're going to just get stuck in this place of worry. And you're only going to be able to see things that are aligned with that worry. And I'm not trying to be all woo-woo here, but if you understand reticular activating system of the brain and how our brains are programmed to notice certain things, if you program your brain to look for opportunities, you'll find them. If you program your brain to look for problems, you'll find those instead. So I think this big change is coming. We've been warned. They tell us when these things are happening so that they're not a big surprise, but how you react is your choice completely. I'm very optimistic that there's fun things ahead. I'm going to watch the show like a popcorn eating theater participant, knowing that a lot of this isn't real. And this collapse of the money system is, I think, been planned for quite some time. And we have a new thing coming along that I'm actually quite bullish is going to be great. So Project Sandman / Operation Sandman, hard to verify because I think a lot of these countries are pretty good at keeping their mouth shut. But it does look like there is something big going on with the dollar system. It's going to change. It's going to bring opportunities. I think, manufacturing in the United States, for example, will benefit greatly from the dollar not being the world reserve currency. I do think, though, that there are going to be some drawbacks, some things. It's been pretty cheap for Americans to travel in places and buy lots of stuff that was inexpensive because the dollar was so strong. So I'd expect some of those things to change. But you know what? One thing that is constant in life is that there's always some kind of change. And I think that this will bring some big changes to us as well. But you can look for the positive, optimistic parts of that change if that is what you seek. So, all right, if you like the video, please hit like, subscribe to the channel if you have not, and I will see you in the next one.